Hey, design friends, this is Cindy Allen, editor-in-chief of Interior Design. And today on Creative Voices, I have a very special talent. She is equal parts artist and anthropologist, and we have lots of work and stories to share on that one, and activist, founding the Black Artists and Designers Guild. She designs sculptural ceramic tiles and vessels, mixed media paintings, hand-woven rugs. I could go on, by the way. And she continues to evolve her craft, share African heritage with the global audience. It's been quite the journey about knowing herself, her enormous talent, and being empowered. This is the creative voice of my friend, Malene Barnett. Hi, Malene.
Hey, Cindy.
I'm so happy to have this time with you and kind of share your whole story with everybody.
Oh, well, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. So thanks for the invitation.
Always, always. It's kind of nice we call it Creative Voices because I think as a designer, you're always on a journey to find your voice. And you've, through a lot of trials and struggles, you really have found a very strong one that is very empowering to so many people. So I'm really excited to get to that. So, but first I want to know, Malene, let's back up a little. And were you a creative kid?
Yeah, actually, I've been drawing ever since I was 8 years old. Like most children, we got our paints and everything, but my art teacher saw something more in me. And so then I got enrolled into an artistically talented program and in third grade. And we would draw and paint on a weekly basis. And that was like my introduction to art. Of course, at that age, you're not thinking about it as like,
Right.
oh, this is something special or anything. It's just what I did. And I really enjoyed working in paint at the time and drawing with pencil.
Was there anybody in your family who had a creative spirit? Was your mom creative?
Oh yeah, I come from a legacy of creators.
Ah,
Actually, it goes far back as my grandmother on my mother's side. She was a fashion designer and she's
ah,
very talented, did a lot of hand beading. She could make anything. And then my mother, she was also, she taught me how to sew. She did macrame. She was really into the crafts and she always would decorate the house. And actually my father, he painted as well. And then I have many various family members who are, in the creative arts in different forms. So I've always been around the art. It just, never thought about it any other way of living.
right.
It was present in my life.
Yeah. No, I always say ask somebody, go back to the beginning and in 5 minutes you have their story, right? Because it's like,
True.
oh, that makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah.
But we found each other through the carpet, the rug trade, right? And so how did you end up there?
Well, it's interesting. I went to FIT, Cindy, right? Fashion Institute of
Yeah.
Technology, New York City. And at the time, I did start out as a fashion illustrator. And to be honest, I knew from my classmates that I was not going to make a career in fashion illustration. I just wasn't, I wasn't the top of my game when it came to that. But I had a professor who said to me, and she called us all by our last name. So she was like, Barnett, like, what are you going to do? And at that time, I said, you know what, Professor Ishikawa, I'm going into textile design. And she said to me, she goes, you know what, that's going to be the best thing for you. And that's where I found
Wow.
rug design. So it's because of when I decided to do my bachelor's in textile design, I was able to design, draw, paint, and then I was able to make a product. And so that was like the perfect match for me at the time.
Ah, yeah. So it always takes somebody to see something in you and direct it, We
Yeah.
say you could have gone left, you could have gone right, but that was amazing, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, because, the work I was doing then, and I think it still transcends now, is that I was really into pattern and color, and
Yeah.
it really translated well for surfaces. And when I found rug design, where it was like this large surface,
Yeah.
and I got to play with fibers and materials of different sorts, and then pile heights and different weave constructions, I got real excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we both have a history of being in the rug industry, which is kind of funny. So when we met, you can tell the story, but when we met, it was like, oh, I need to know her.
Shall we tell?
Yeah, go ahead, you tell them.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, Cindy. I mean, there was an event, this is early on when I first started Melanie B,
Yeah.
right? And I would scour the magazines and, I want to know who the editors were. And, I was doing my homework. And, Interior Design magazine was on my list of, hey, this is a place where I'd want to be featured, or, I want them to know about me.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I knew of your name,
Mhm.
and it was an event and everybody was flocking around you. I was like, oh, who is she? Who is she? And then
Oh,
someone told me, and I was like, oh, so that's who Cindy is,
ah,
right? So I was able to put the name in the face, right?
yeah.
And it wasn't until the show in Las Vegas, the hospitality show,
Right.
where I did a day in and day out. So what's that? The red eye, right?
Yeah.
I can't even think about the term because I haven't flown in so long.
My God, I know it's crazy, right?
But it was a red eye. I was going to Vegas show for the day because I wanted to learn more about that show and again, connect with more potential partners. And so that flight coming back was that JetBlue flight. And I saw you in line. I was like, that's Cindy Allen that I saw at the event. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to say something to her. But I waited until we got on the plane. And then just so happened you weren't sitting too far from me.
Right.
And I reached out and I said, hey, what do I have to lose? She could just say, hey, but you didn't. You embraced me. You said, you know what? Let me give you my assistant's number and you should come into my office.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
that's how it started, right?
that's how it started. I
Yeah.
introduced myself. I told you what I did and, you connected with me. And, the next thing I know, I was in your office and we were having conversation and we're still talking to this day. And
Yeah.
that was 2000, that was in 2010.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? So to make a long story short, we ended up publishing Malene and the Transitions collection. And I still remember really how beautiful it was, but also like how deeply connected you were to the heritage of place. And those were different. Those were not your homes because one was Mexico, as I remember, right? But that was that connection to tradition and doing something new to it was really your talent.
Yes, yes, and it still runs through
Yeah,
me to this day.
yeah. It absolutely does, and I think it's only gotten stronger.
Yeah.
And knowing, we always say like know yourself. That was maybe even some of the struggle that you endured over a period of time.
Yeah, because Cindy, my core has always been present in my work, and when you're learning about your own culture and heritage and place, and then you put it out to the world, and then you're trying to sell it. It's a challenge,
Yeah.
and and then what I had to realize was that maybe this part of me it doesn't connect with the end result, meaning the material in this way and for the end use, because when we think about rugs, they're being placed on the floor and in environments, and it's and they make spaces beautiful. They are game changing. But I think that the heritage and the histories that I wanted to talk about needed to change mediums. And to your point of with my introduction of all these different materials that I've explored, I realized it was time to explore other materials to tell my story.
Right. I mean, honestly, it makes so much more sense that you opened up your world, and by speaking out, because you spoke out about the inequities in our world, and because you were able to do that. First of all, you were the same girl that I met on that plane with that courage, and but because you were able to find that inner courage to be like, you opened the door for many talent, and that's not only a huge deal, it's like an enormous deal, lady.
Yes,
But also for yourself. So what was that like?
well, it was, I was at a point, Cindy, where I had taken a sabbatical from the business because I really had to take a step back. And when you take a step back from things, you're able to see from a different perspective.
Yeah.
It was very hard to like really get perspective on an industry, on the business while you're like in it,
Right.
because
True.
there's always this fear, Cindy, and
Mhm.
and I'll speak to my colleagues, specifically Black artists and designers who are in the business. There's this constant fear of if I do blah blah blah, I may not. So it's always there. And so I got to the point where I said, you know what? I don't want to live like this for the rest of my life. And guess
Yeah.
what? My ancestors did not do what they did for me to be in this position and not use the tools and the opportunities and the space in a different way. And
Right.
so that's when I said, I took that pause, and that pause really changed my life for that time, and I was glad that I did. And that's when I was able to say, you know what? It's time that we pretty much air out that dirty laundry that
Mhm.
has been there and no one is saying anything anymore. And, like my mother always taught me, you work with what you have. And at the time, it was social media.
Yeah.
And, I said, listen, hey, I'll put it out. What do I have to lose, Cindy? Like
Right.
at the end of the day, when I thought about it, like really, what do I have to lose? Either
Right.
people are going to say, I'm crazy. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Or they're going to say, you know what? I'm glad you said that. I've been feeling that way. Thank you for putting this out. It's actually giving me the courage now to speak out in whatever space that I am actually navigating through. And that's really what happened. And that's what I wanted to happen, for everyone to realize that they're a leader and that they have the power to change those spaces and the dynamics
Yeah.
of how people treat you and how you want to be treated. Like it is possible. That respect, the pay, the level of creativity for the opportunities to be creative, they should be afforded to you.
Yeah.
And but you have to understand there's a lot of trauma and mental instabilities that we've been navigating for so long, that we've been so numb to the system that it's very hard to really think about what is possible, because so many possibilities have not been available. And that's what I've been trying to get people to see. Like, listen, there are many opportunities, and guess what? You have a right to them, but you have to believe that.
Right. Right. It's true. It's true. And so so that's how organically the Black Artists and Designers Guild started, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And Cindy, it's been something that's been on my mind for many years, not knowing what to call it, not knowing how to
Yeah.
form. Because when I travel, I've traveled to many countries around the world. And when I do, I generally, I reach out to those Black artists and designers globally, because I know what the challenges are like. I'm challenged, it's challenged in America, it's challenged all over the world. And so because when we're in these circles, we're usually one of few.
Right.
And and so it was always been my thing. And of course, social media has helped to connect us even
Yeah.
more.
Hmm.
So there's no filters there. And I got to that point again because I was on that pause. Like, you know what? We have the internet. We have this. Let's just get together. Let's create that safe
Yeah.
space. And that's what we did. It started as a directory, and it's grown to become so much more.
Yeah, and there's something really lovely about because we'll talk about, like, you have a fabric collection coming out that's through the guild, and what I love so much is also that it's a collaboration of voices,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, it is. It is. And it was purposely set up that way because the idea of having many voices versus just one, the industry is used to, it's been designed so only one of us could come through, which again, the Guild is about trying not to disseminate that no, many of us can come through and be heard and be seen and be hired. So the opportunity for us to collaborate was, the first of many, we hope, you
Yeah.
know, setting the foundation of what's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if, I want to say something. First of all, you know, I've always looked at, interior design, sort of my responsibility as a global magazine of design. And in that way, we are starved for those voices. We really are. And and so I feel sorry that you were going through that, especially like knowing you. And I saw you growing in your career in different times, because so what happens is when you publish somebody for the first time and then they start getting published by
Yes,
other, I remember Wendy Goodman did your apartment. I just get really proud of that.
yes.
So, yeah, I feel I'm sad that I didn't know all your struggles.
Yeah, well, Cindy, the challenge within the challenge, because when people see me in publications all the time, right? They think everything is, oh my gosh, it gets all these accolades, and
Right, right,
but it did not translate into my bank account, and I think
right.
that's the reality. I
Mhm.
was hustling. I didn't have a staff. Like I still wasn't, I didn't have a team for me. But people think, because again, I think like you as an editor of a magazine, the power in it, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what happens is, I think there's this disconnect between the public and these publications. It doesn't necessarily equate that the person has a thriving business.
Right. No, that's true. That's true. And you were so young. I mean, you seem really young. You still seem young, but you were so young. Like, she was taking, for everyone out there, she was taking on, the handmade carpet, industry, which is tough to do. Like, you went to the toughest of the tough. But anyway, yes, I completely understand. Well, but since speaking out and also being a positive force, let's face it, you are a positive force for change.
Yes.
And that is your message, which I think is a beautiful one. So there's a lot of fun stuff, that you're doing right now, and I definitely want to share it. So let's talk about the S. Harris collaboration.
Sure. What would you like to know?
Yeah. So it was called the Origin collection, right? And celebrating Indigenous craft and traditions. And so who of the group? And by the way, do you call yourself Bad, or what do you call yourself?
We go between badge, BAD,
Badge.
Right? Sometimes it's Bad Guild, because that's our Instagram account.
Yeah, that's cute.
But, we're trying to just coin badge, and then
Badge. Okay,
yeah.
So all right. So who's from Badge?
It's all good, we don't mind the multiple names.
Yeah.
But the team consisted of Raymond Boozer, Beth Diana Smith, Aaron Shakur, and Linda Hazlett, and myself. And so there are 5 creatives. Raymond was tasked to figure out where in the world are we going to be inspired from. Right. And so we came up with these 3 regions, not necessarily specific countries, regions. We looked at East Africa, we looked at Southeast Asia, and then we looked at the New Zealand, Papua New Guinea area. And then we took a deeper dive into which crafts do we really want to hone in on. And it was from woodwork to braiding to different weaving styles. And that's what we really wanted to make that connection to with the work. And when you see the collection, it does consist of fabrics, wallpaper, and trims. And we incorporated a lot of those techniques into the making of each product. And so we're really proud of it. And
it's by the way, it is so gorgeous. There's a beautiful image of like pieces of all the different collections together. It is just like, wow, it really is a stunner. I wanted to know, because I know that you were inspired by this Black artist from the 30s and 40s. Is it Lois Mailou Jones?
Oh, Lois Mailou Jones. Yeah.
Yeah, she is amazing.
Yeah.
And she has all those beautiful masks, right? She was a painter.
Yes, she was a painter. But because of her, Cindy, that's how I discovered there was an actual job called a textile designer. Because she worked as a textile designer early on. And again, I learned about that in my first year in college. That's when I learned about her during my African American art history class. And that's when I was like, oh, I never heard of that before, And I mean, yes, she was a painter. And of course, like most artists, we work in different mediums. Right. We've worked in different styles of art. But like she's one of my girls in my head.
Yeah, totally. And I saw that she paints a lot of masks. And I thought that one of the wall coverings looks like, that you were inspired by her, which I love it. It's so chic and it's so gorgeous. But also she was a good representation for you. And, that's something we talk about a lot right now when we're talking about diversity, is that, how do you have mentors, right? How do you have mentors, and how at a very young age do you even know what art and design is? Mm-hmm. And so that takes a lot of education. I love that she was an artist and an educator.
That's right. Yep. And like many had to, and to be honest, many had to be in order to support their art careers.
Right.
But yeah, they go hand in hand anyway, the education as well as the actual making of art.
Yeah, for sure. And you will, and that will be something you give the world as well. I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it's in my cards, Cindy.
I think it's in your cards. Okay. I know, right? All right, so then let's talk about the obsidian, the obsidian house.
Yeah.
I love the name. It's a protective stone or a shield. So
Right.
tell us about this virtual house.
Well, the Virtual Concept House, it's our legacy project. For the Bag Guild, we have our creative incubator, and our first project is Obsidian. And we really wanted to take a look about what does it mean for Black bodies to occupy space. And we really thought about, during, especially because we came up with this idea during COVID, and thinking about health and wellness of the Black family, and how could we create space and use design as a tool to empower the community, to promote wellness, thinking about sustainability, innovation, technology. How could we think about all of these things in this space that we're creating? And so we wanted to position our members as creative thinkers and think about design, not just for pretty spaces, and as I said, but how do we empower the community?
Yeah.
And that is like the birth of Obsidian. And so two architects on our team, Nina Cookjohn and Layden Lewis, they designed the structure. And then we invited 21 other creators to design the interior spaces. And each one has a different story relating to the diaspora from various aspects. Because the idea, Cindy, was there was no client. So we got to do whatever you wanted. Because you know how it is. You know the industry. When you have a client, all these restraints. So you have a blank canvas, so you get to do whatever you want as long as you're thinking about those principles that we shared. And it is a fully immersive virtual experience. It has its own website, obsidianbybadge.house, and we really are excited to share it with everyone.
Yeah, and you worked on tile. We're going to get to your ceramic, your love of ceramic, and mine too, by the way. But let's talk about these beautiful tiles, and that they were etched with family members' names, right? Leaving that kind of that mark.
That's right. I actually created the Sankofa legacy wall because, you know, Cindy, I was thinking about the archives in the Black family. You know, my grandmother, I talked about early on, I never actually had a chance to really meet her because she passed when I was a baby. And so that whole grandparent experience I haven't had on either side. And I thought about, well, what happened to all of those things that they had, the photographs, the videos, you know, the mementos? How do we preserve that, you know? And I think about those next generations, like I would want them to go back and see, like there's this whole collection. And so I used clay because clay keeps us grounded. It's that material that we all touch each and every day without even thinking about it. And we take it for granted because it is under our feet on a daily basis. But it also is a part of the African Black diaspora experience of life, thinking about the idea, it's life and death is a circular motion. There's these eternity. It's not a linear process. And so I thought, what better way to prepare for our death by living and really holding on and preserving the things that keep us close to our memories of our loved ones in a space that is protected at all times. And how do we use technology to recreate those moments that we may not have had? So the wall is voice activated. So I could say, what did grandma look like when she was 15? And then it would appear on the screen. Maybe it's my mother's 75th anniversary, birthday, or whatever. Like all the screens would change into her life story. You know, so the idea is that it had multiple use. It would hold our wills. It would hold our trust. It would hold land ownership, like all the important documents that a family would have to hold on to. This wall will preserve it. And then the etching, where the carvings with the names as well as the pattern, it really helps to keep the family close to those ancestors, because part of the tradition is we look to our ancestors for guidance. And so what better way is to go to that wall, sit next to it, touch it, you know, and just ask for that guidance and just feel close. So you could always, you know, keep the memory of whoever, whether they're living or not, but that wall would hold those memories for you.
That's so beautiful. And, you know, it's a virtual house,
Yes.
but it makes you want to feel like you were there, right? Like having that really makes like you want to touch and connect. I don't know, maybe someday that'll be somewhere, right, Malene?
That is our goal.
I know. I'm like, okay, let's throw it out there to the world. Let's throw it out there.
That's right. We want to do that. But Cindy, we've been talking to museums, about even bringing certain sections of it to life. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah, so I feel like there will be opportunity for people to actually experience Obsidian in person.
Good, because I want to touch the wall. I have to touch your wall, okay? All right, so let's talk about clay and your love of ceramics. Everyone should know right now, Malene's back in school, like, because this girl, she doesn't stop. And really, and what I love so much is your hunger to learn. Your hunger to learn, and like you said, learn histories and traditions of your ancestries and of places all around the world. So how long ago did you start working in ceramics?
It's been 3 years now. Yeah, we're talking. Yeah, like towards the end of 2018, I took a class, but 2019 is when I was really into it, full-fledged. And and I started grad school just in September of 2020. So I'll be in history, the first class to graduate during the COVID period, because we started right when we're in the, pretty much the middle of it. So we haven't had the traditional education of in person. My professors don't come to school. So everything's been online. The good thing is, as a grad student, we have our own private studios.
Wow. So tell us some of that. I know there's a beautiful series called Redemption that you've been working on. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I was looking at the gele head wrap as the signifier. And the geles are the head wraps the Yoruba in Nigeria use. Beautiful, head ties. And, and the idea was, I was really interested in the folds and how fabric could weave into our lives, and thinking about creating vessels mimicking that process. So the vessels that I created from that collection are each woven by different strips of clay to kind of mimic the idea of this wrapping, and the wrapping of history, the wrapping of experience. And when I'm hand building, that's what I'm usually thinking about. I'm thinking about my life, my journey as a Black woman, and then the women who came before me, and how does that translate into these vessels. So that is, it's an ongoing collection, group of work. I don't look at it as, oh, it's done. That is just the beginning, and I employ different techniques, different hand building techniques, as well as hand carving techniques.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like there's like many, like, as you said, techniques that is something like harder to achieve than something else for you.
I would say longer process. The carving is a longer process, but it's very meditative for me. So I actually really enjoy that part of the process. I explored different clays, from red clays to black clay too. So that is also cool. And then the patterns that I'm using on the outside, they're all freehand. So I'm not like creating a sketch. It's all freehand, done with different types of squeeze bottles and wax resist. So I was also looking at the Adire fabric from Nigeria, which is a wax resist fabric. So I was mimicking those techniques in clay.
Wow. And what about colorations? Because that's a whole other. Yeah.
It is. And do you see how some ceramic artists, they don't use glaze too much? Right. Because it is a whole nother part.
Now, speaking of the creative process, something I think that's probably like quicker that you do, that's also quite beautiful. I love your paintings.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Yes.
And it looks like you do two different kinds of, like, I love that very free, it looks very quick. Like, how does your hand move on those? Like, how do you describe those?
That's when I say, just let go. Don't even worry about anything. Like, this is not about things being in proportion, because you're not really trying to draw a human being exactly. Honestly, I feel like that's what photography is for. The creative part of being the artist is you get to change all of that. So why do I have to stick? And I don't. And plus, I love watercolor as a medium.
Yeah.
And watercolor, if you've worked in it, it has a mind of its own. And it's very hard to try to replicate anything in watercolor. So I really love that. So I'm always creating one-of-a-kind items.
Yeah, I love that too. So it's like everything now to me is, even the virtual is very tactile from you, right? Yeah.
It is.
Oh, Malene. So can you kind of describe, because you're like such an inspiration for a lot of people, especially right now when the world needs a lot of healing.
Yeah.
Um, where are you right now in your journey? We say it's always about a journey. Like, how are you doing, and what do you see in the future?
Like everybody else, I have my own personal struggles that I deal with. But I believe in therapy and I believe in support. I'm not one of those people who's afraid to have those conversations with professional help because, you
Yeah,
know, the accountability really makes a huge difference, especially, having a therapist, in the Black community, there's a lot of stigmatisms around that. Like, we don't need that, but we all do, to be honest. And that my art is also my outlet for expressing myself.
yeah.
And I'll be honest, Cindy, right now, because I'm not tied to like any outcome to what I'm doing, there's a lot of freedom in that. And I think if we have to let go of a lot of things, and we have to think about, I'm constantly thinking about, what do we let go of and what do we leave behind and what do I carry with me moving forward? And
Mm,
it's a constant question. And I don't think there's one definitive answer. But I think when we think about where we are at this moment, that there are things that we'll let go of and it's okay. And then there are new things that we'll pick up. And I'm really excited about what I'm going to pick up next.
right.
And just celebrate those moments from the past. Like, that was my thing, back for that period of my life. And that was good. But I've grown and I want to continue to grow. And I think that's really important, Cindy, for us to realize that growth is a constant thing if we choose it to be. I'm not interested in treading water. I want to be a swimmer. A swimmer will swim as far as they can. And I'm very interested to see how far I can swim on this journey.
Your talent keeps exploding, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of ways to share your language. And it took your own courage to do that, So I'm so proud. I am really so proud of you, and that you have this enormous talent, but also a voice for positive change in the world. And it's you. So I
Thank
want to,
you, Cindy. Thank you. Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah. So thank you. And thanks to our badge
Yes,
folks.
badge.
Badge folks. Lot of good creativity ahead. And a big hug to Melanie Barnett,
Sending
who
it
I always think of as Melanie B. I can't help it.
back.
Melanie B. You're my girl.
TV.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, lots of love to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm sending the love back, Cindy. Thank you
Right.
so much.
Yes. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Metropolis Think Tank Thursdays. I'm Tina Brennan, Vice President of Marketing and Events at Metropolis. We're grateful to have you with us. Today, we are very pleased to be hosted by Perkins and Will, who will be examining the impact of the pandemic on real estate development through the lens of outdoor space. Hosting an event like this requires the support of great firms like Perkins and Will and our incredible sponsors. We'd like to thank Rowie, designing and engineering innovative water products and bathroom solutions and kitchen fittings. Knoll Textiles, modern perspective performance textiles. Landscape Forms, design, cultural, craft. Material Bank, the largest material marketplace for sampling in the architecture and interior design industry. Mohawk Group, industry leaders in innovative, high-performance, worry-free flooring solutions for the built environment. Tucci, life outside is a life well lived. Woodard, Craftmate, Luxury Outdoor Furniture, Premier Lighting. Today's conversation will be approximately an hour and a half. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Metropolis's Editor-in-Chief, Avi Rajagopal. Avi?
Thanks so much, Tina. And thank you everyone for joining us for today's conversation. We're here today to talk about the outdoors. I think this COVID-19 pandemic has really encouraged so many of us to discover a new love for going outside. But it's not as though we weren't talking about outdoor space before that. I remember that, 2019 and even before that, I was a part of many interesting conversations about how we might think about outdoor space as usable space, for instance, in commercial real estate, how we can think about outdoor space as connector spaces in education or residential projects, and how we think about outdoor space as productive space in cities, right? I'd like to joke that in office real estate, we were in the midst of an amenities war, for a long time, and green space, outdoor space, was one of those really sought after amenities, even in geographies, even in places in the United States where that space would not be usable, all through the year. In a city like Atlanta, of course, outdoor space is beautiful through the year. And so it is a real asset. It is a real amenity, and it is a real, I think, design space and a space of opportunity for us as we work through this pandemic and as we look to the future. To talk about how we can, look at outdoor space through that design lens and through the lens of work. How we can bring workplace strategy, learning, and principles of biophilia into our approach towards interiors and exteriors and the relationship between the two. We have a fantastic group of panelists here today. Joining us is Jim Irvin, who is president at New City. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. David Weissman, who's the development manager at Tribridge Residential. David, thank you for joining us. Robin Lackey, who's the Senior Director of Project Planning and Design at Emory University. Robin, it's a pleasure to have you. And Zan Stewart, who's the Associate Principal of Landscape Architecture at Perkins & Will, the Atlanta office. Zan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to start with you. I know you've been doing a whole set of work around this idea of working landscapes as part of Perkins & Will's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd love for you to take us through that work. You have a small presentation you'd like to share, and tell us a little bit more about how you're thinking about work outdoors in new ways today. So Zan, over to you.
See if I can share my screen, see if this works. All right. Avi, first off, I'd like to thank you and Metropolis for having us here today and giving us this platform. And a special thanks to Kelly for all of her work behind the scenes. Really appreciate it. I wanted to frame up the conversation today really on the increased value of outdoor space as a result of the pandemic. And we started working on this booklet in the spring, Working Landscapes, which was about shifting work and learning environments to the outdoors. And now my page isn't turning. So let's see if I can get it. And one of the reasons that we started this booklet was because clients were asking for it. In March, they were asking for it specifically, what are your solutions for the pandemic? And what was interesting is they weren't just asking for any solution. They were looking for long-term solutions. And this is a fine point because in March, we didn't think the pandemic was going to last that long. My friends at the CDC said, it's going to be over at June. And yet the clients weren't looking at that short-term window. There was a fundamental shift in how our clients were looking at outdoor space. This isn't the first time there has been a shift. In the 19th century, the cholera, tuberculosis, and flu pandemics, they gave rise to some of the greatest outdoor spaces in the world. The boulevards of Paris, the Central Park in New York. And so looking at history and seeing what we can learn from it is important. And to that point, we started looking at workplace history and the relationship between workplace and nature. And workplace is an interesting word these days, right? Because it's not just the office anymore. It's the mixed use development, it's the campus, it's your home, it's all sorts of different things. But the research that has been done, it says something very specific. And it says that our teams can be healthier, happier, and more productive with access and views to nature. It's a simple thing. It's something that seems easy enough, but yet we don't always do it. And if there is a silver lining to the pandemic, there is this more acute awareness of being outdoors and spending time outdoors. So what we wanted to do was give our clients some solutions, and to start that conversation with our clients, we created what I call a menu of considerations. And my dear friend Valdis Zusmanis gets a lot of credit for this. But this menu of considerations, all it is a checklist so that when you're developing an outdoor space, that you can go through and you can understand what kind of inputs you need, what factors, so that your outdoor space is high performing. And they range from safety to productivity to how much do things cost. But at the end of the day, there's things like comfort that range widely from a place like Maine to Miami, and we mentioned Texas, so Texas is a wild card now. And it's interesting because there's not a single solution for every project. There's no silver bullet solution. And so the first thing we did was we put together a few just little vignettes to get our clients thinking about things. They weren't supposed to be direct answers. They range from partitions that were flexible, you could write on, they could close and open up, to work pavilions, more of a workhorse place, to something a little more creative where you use water to create social distancing, to something as simple as a planted amphitheater. And an amphitheater is something on almost every campus in America, yet with a simple intervention, demarcating where people sit during pandemic times, you create adaptable and flexibility in the system. And that's another thing that we keep hearing from clients, is they want that flexibility. The long-term look that we were hearing is, fine, we may get through this pandemic, but we want to be prepared for what happens in the future. I want to end on this slide. This is a project we're working in San Francisco, and it's an interesting take, but I think it shows that future shift and that mindset. And the client was adamant about, what is our response to the pandemic? And what we did here was, it seems like a courtyard, but what it actually is the front door to the building. So instead of having the formal traditional kind of planting that you would see as the approach to the building, we're creating this outdoor room, a series of outdoor rooms with planting buffers, multiple access walks that could be turned into one-way systems if there's a pandemic, different kinds of seating types, different kinds of work types, workspaces, so that there is this adaptable, flexible system that is built for the future. The last thing I want to say is, today, we could have brought in a whole bunch of designers, but we thought it's important to hear from the clients to get their perspectives. And so that's what we've done. We've got these three great people that have agreed to join me and really looking to hear what trends they're seeing with outdoor space in general on their projects and moving forward. So thank you.
Thanks so much, San. I really appreciate that. One of the little touches I loved in that deck that you just shared was that quick cheat on how costly it is and how difficult it is to maintain on many of the strategies that you showed. And I think, that's one of the things that, with outdoor space, right? Especially in you making usable outdoor space, it's one of the many considerations is, how much is it going to cost, and, how is it going to be maintained? Outdoor landscaping is often considered, has been considered more of an extra sometimes in office buildings in particular, because of those reasons. So I absolutely love that. And thank you so much for taking us through that. I love the slide on the history of the workspace and outdoors as well. And this shift we've had, outdoor work really comes out of, it's just a logical next step from the idea that, we are no longer tethered to a workstation, that we've made that cultural shift over the years, over the last half century or so to be kind of ready for this now. So, and putting that outdoor space at the front door is just fantastic. I'd love to hear from Jim, because I think Jim, Zan ended on that great, workplace project, right? That really owns its outdoor space. You're working on some mixed use and office development projects right now, both of which are, I'm sure will have some outdoor space of their own, but they're also connected to two of the most incredible green spaces in the city of Atlanta, right? The Beltline and the historic Fourth Ward Park. So tell us a little bit about how you're looking at outdoor space as you're thinking about, commercial development. Like how are you fitting that right into sort of your planning, your thinking about how space is developed?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, and also for having me. I'm really honored. It's interesting. You talked about the amenity war that many developers go through, and really, from my perspective, you have to imagine 2 or 3 years after I've been sitting with the designers, working through the planning and having fun dreaming up new spaces. Imagine yourself, sitting around a model with the noise and vibration of construction going on in the background, and you're talking to future tenants and trying to describe all these great fun ideas and sort of compact that into a very, very discrete amount of time to try to explain what makes your project different than others. And frequently the way that developers like myself do that is basically listing amenities, and just as you said, and for a long time, there was sort of this felt need to make that list as long and just almost just drown people with quantity, right? But what I have found is honestly more enjoyable, fun, fulfilling, and easier to explain in those situations is when we are working on projects that are next to the Beltline and major, public parks and infrastructure like the historic Fourth Ward Park that you mentioned. I no longer feel pressure to list amenities, because I honestly, the way I begin most tours is by saying, just simply this: close your eyes, and it's a little bit awkward, but people chuckle kind of nervously, but then I say, look, close your eyes, and just for a moment, imagine actually enjoying where you go to work every day. And people kind of chuckle, and then they kind of go, oh wow. And then I said, just look outside, and I'm pointing at the Beltline right now to my left, and imagine being able to go for a walk in the middle of the day. If you're in a creative brief, to be able to stroll, a mile up and down the Beltline, to see people, to enjoy nature, and so part of what we do is not try to create these sort of enclaves of private outdoor space, but instead try to democratize it, try to literally connect public space and private, and really what becomes we spend less time focused on our lobbies, these sort of marble clad mausoleums that you feel like you have to be very, very quiet because you hear the security guard clicking through. But instead, the open space is the lobby, the public area where you're literally blending public and private spaces, where you're not really sure whether you're standing on public land or private. And what ends up happening is then we're able to create rooms and places for people to sit and enjoy. And you almost think of it as a river of flowing humanity where you create little eddies and pockets of slower movement for people to sit and enjoy. And that ultimately leads not only to a more compelling story when you're in these leasing presentations, but also I would say just better community for everyone, which is a lot of fun.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, you know, I love that you're starting with this idea of that emotional connection to where you work, you know, and that really, you know, wins the game before, you know, it's even begun, right? I mean, I love that that's part of your pitches. And then, of course, you know, what you're talking about, you know, the connection to these great amenities, you know, that's really important. It's just, it's really great how, you know, we're starting to think about amenities as not just, and, you know, I think part of the problem with the amenity war was that everything also had to be, you know, in the footprint of your building. And now
Yes.
I think we're coming back to that idea that everything doesn't need to be in the footprint of your building, right?
Yes.
That there is a connection between buildings. There's a connection to the city, you know, that count as part of the amenities. So, you know, absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much, Jim. David, I'd love to bring you in here. You know, commercial development, of course, you know, they have a certain, you know, there is a certain sort of response that's very client driven or tenant driven. But with, you know, the sort of residential communities that TrueBridge builds, you know, TriBridge builds, I'm sorry. How are you making the outdoors a part of sort of your offering to the tenants and to the communities? And also, how do you look at outdoors as a sort of community building measure in your developments?
Yeah, sure, Avi, and thanks for having me and including me. I think that you know, I think I have to tackle this. We look at this as a problem on a property by property basis, but I think I have to tackle it a little bit more generally in this case. And it's just that, right? What is the problem? Well, the problem is that the line is blurry between work and home life now, more so than it's ever been. So, you know, we're in a situation where more people are working from home, temporary or long term, than ever before. And so the first thing we're guilty of as developers is that we always are trying to quantify and re-quantify things, right? And so what we look at in our portfolio and then for future developments is, you know, how many people are working from home pre-COVID compared to, you know, post-COVID? And can we pinpoint a number there? And it's hard to, but what we can say is that, you know, if 15% of residents were working from home pre-COVID, that number is probably somewhere, you know, was as high as 70% at one time. And maybe it normalizes around 45%. Well, on a 300 unit property, you know, that's a difference of 50 people working from home to 150 people working from home. It's significant. And so the indoor, you know, co-working spaces that were the norm for a long time in our developments, you know, are suitable for 15 to 20 people. They're mostly indoors, right? They're a reprieve for people to get out of their units, maybe use a conference room. And those spaces are simply becoming inadequate, right? It's difficult to social distance, right? People are just less comfortable. And so we look at where what that tells us, you know, where are the opportunities where we might be able to create a safer environment, options for our residents to get out of their unit, right? The change of scenery that is so important as we've all worked from home. We all move our laptops around our house, right? And so we look to the outdoors, right, for the solution. And that takes several forms, you know, to Jim's point about the amenities war, right, and the long laundry list. We also prioritize that list and the flexibility of these outdoor spaces. And for the longest time now, those outdoor spaces haven't looked a whole lot like work environments. They've looked like play environments. And so we have to look outside. We have to reprioritize some of the spaces. priority number one being kind of those flexible work spaces, making sure people can stay connected. They can meet with people outside. They can also have their own space outside and feel as, COVID carefree as we can, which I realize is a very relative term. And so, that's what the problem that we're trying to tackle is. And that's what we challenge Zan and the rest of our design teams to help us to solve.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, especially in residential, that shift, right, from spaces that look like they're spaces for play or for relaxation to spaces that can look like they're actually meant for work, for productivity. I think that's an even bigger shift than, maybe in the commercial world where, there is already, at least in some places, some culture of, cafe tables or bench seating outside where people will occasionally take their laptop outside. And as long as, you're still within range of the Wi-Fi from the building and so on and so forth. But, I think in residential, that culture doesn't yet exist, but it certainly feels like we're ripe for that. It feels like we're ready for that.
No doubt. And I know we're all tackling, right, this quarantine fatigue, right, depending on what type of development we have. Our quarantine fatigue is people coming out of their homes and they need a place to go. And so every square foot of outdoor space has to be revalued for residents.
Right. I'm going to come to you, Robin, in just a second. But before we do that, I'm already seeing some questions from our audience coming in. Just a reminder to everyone else, please go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A tab. We'll start taking questions in just a few minutes. And all questions are fair game. Our panelists today represent a wide range of expertise around many different building types. This is really an amazing opportunity to get some expert opinion on some thoughts that you might be having. So please go ahead and put your questions in, and we'll start taking those in just a minute. Robin, obviously, universities, they've understood the value of outdoor space for a very long time. I mean, to think of a American university that doesn't have a big green space, a big plaza, something like that. And then of course, to see students there with their textbooks, and things like that all the time. I mean, that's pretty normal. So there's this healthy culture of sort of taking work outside in universities. But how are you, and of course, Emory, you guys have, across your 3 campuses, some amazing green spaces attached to your university or on campus. Are you thinking about ways of leveraging that space a little differently post-pandemic? Is there a drive to kind of optimize or encourage that space, the use of the space, or to control it or make it safer? Like, just what are the changes in how you're thinking about those spaces?
Sure. And thank you for having me today. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Emory University, we're in the city of Atlanta. We have about 700 acres on our main campus in the heart of a neighborhood called Druid Hills. And Druid Hills was actually designed and planned by Olmsted. So by its very nature, we are a campus within a park. And then we also have a large preserve, about 150 acres, low water preserve as part of our campus in the city of Atlanta. That is a campus space, but it's also a public space full of a lake for fishing and trails for bike riding, and a really an amenity for our whole kind of section of Atlanta. And so I will say, because of that sort of grounding in nature and parks, even to this day, when we're planning development, when we're planning a new building, the spaces between our buildings are just as fundamental to the conversation as the buildings themselves. And we look at not just the spaces and the buildings in its immediate vicinity and those relationships, but we really look, about cross-campus connections. And, if I'm in the School of Medicine, I am likely moving from this corner to that corner in my day, and I'm hauling all of this stuff around. And so what does that look like, and what do those connections feel like? And so I think, because that is so fundamental to the way that we think about our space, when we started to think about planning and the pandemic, it was fundamental to our planning. So last March, like everyone else in the world, we shut down, and we spent months shutting down the university, right, and sending everyone home. And then as soon as we got everything shut down, we immediately started thinking about how we're going to open back up and how do we get students back on campus for the fall of 2020 at that point. And so thinking about our outdoor space was fundamental to that planning to get students and faculty and staff back on campus. So we deployed dozens of tents around campus. So the climate in Atlanta can be incredibly hot, especially in August when everyone's coming back to school. So thinking about shading and how to provide spaces for holding class outside. So we put a lot of tents up around campus, furnished those tents so that they could be used for classes during the day. And then in the evening for the residential students we had, it could be social space in the evening. We painted the circles on our quad. You know, everyone's seen the images of the circles and stay in your circle. So our quad is full of circles and we place Adirondack chairs around. And we placed a lot of tables and chairs kind of socially distanced outside. So if you want to just stop and work on whatever you need to work on outside for a while, you can do that. So that's all sort of what we've been doing now during the pandemic, but just thinking through the planning and how we think about our buildings and the future of outdoor space. Sustainability is critical to our mission and our vision for the university. And so one of the challenges that we run into is sort of balancing sustainability initiatives with everything else, you know, that we need to think about. So we have a dedication to reducing turf and to reducing hardscape and stormwater runoff. But at the same time, we have this dedication to providing outdoor space. So, you know, working with our design teams and working through what that means to create meaningful outdoor space without planting grass or making hardscapes, that's a challenge, right? And like I said, the climate, you know, during the summers can be a challenge. So thinking about sun shading in a way that is permanent for outdoor space, but still feels open and you know, not like you're in a pavilion, so you can still feel like you're outside. And then I also, because we're here to talk about workspace, the university is a workspace, but we're a workspace for so many different types of work, right? So we have the students who are doing the work of being the students, faculty who are doing the work of teaching. We have researchers who are, you know, doing all of the work in their labs. We have a major hospital on our campus. So we have healthcare and that clinical mission and folks who are visitors for that. And just really sort of balancing what those outdoor experiences feel like and how they serve this kind of broad community of needs is always something that we're thinking through.
Yeah. Robin, you've brought up something such a key tension to this whole idea of working outdoors, which is, you know, we want to take something that is very much a, you know, a human-driven activity, but now we want to do it in a place where there's other species, where we're not entirely in control of the environment or climate, right? And so the things you brought up, you know, when you were talking about sustainability, you know, are just so key. It's really about, you know, how do we build a better relationship with nature that allows us to do some of the things, right? You know, like be on our laptops or, you know, whatever that is, but at the same time be with nature. And that's a break, like a rift that we've built over, you know, so many decades, if not centuries, and one that now we're trying to bridge again, right? And that's just, you know, that's fundamental to what we're talking about today. And it's so incredible to hear you talk about it in those terms. And of course, you know, it was wonderful to hear about all the measures that you're already taking on campus, you know, the tents, you know, and all the different little interventions that you've made. But, to talk about long-term, you brought us back, full circle to where Zan started, right? That we're looking at this not just as short-term amenities, but long-term. I mean, Jim was talking about, you're sitting, you're thinking 2-3 years from now of the time when you're going to be sitting with that prospective tenant, right? Or when David is talking about, how do we anticipate the needs of the next set of tenants and the next set of tenants, or the next set of homeowners, in these things, and they're going to represent many different generations, just like Robin, you have many different types of workers, right? So it's such a complex ecosystem we're trying to build, in this kind of work outdoor scenario. So there's lots for us to explore today, and we have lots of questions from the audience. Before we jump into all of that, a quick thank you again to all our sponsors: Growy, Noel Textiles, Landscape Forms, Material Bank, Mohawk, Tucci, and Woodard Craftmade for supporting today's discussion. And of course, a big thank you to Perkins and Will for bringing all of you together and for hosting today's conversation. Thanks so much, guys. Robin was talking a lot about shading. We have one more poll question coming up for you that pertains to that. So while we start to take our audience questions, if you can take a second and respond to that, I'd be really grateful. So our first question here, Jennifer says, I'm a little surprised that not one of the presenters is speaking from outdoors today. Does this speak to the challenges facing us in the current work model, where so much of our time, at least currently, is now on Zoom or some video meeting platform? And of course, we had Christine respond and say it might be cold where everybody's sitting. So there's two tensions packed in there, but we'll pick up one of those, which is technology. We have another question about technology further down. I was once on a hike with a friend, and she said, "Oh my God, this is so beautiful. The only way it could be better is if I had Wi-Fi." So there's that tension with nature, right? Like, we need technology and we need connectivity to do our work. And I know, Zan, that was part of your thinking in the Working Landscapes work that you did as well. So I'd love to hear just reactions from all of you, Zan and Robin in particular, but Jim and David as well, in terms of how do we start to think about technology outdoors, especially as it seems like it is really the key to flexible work.
Yeah, I'll start, and I'm still a little lost in Jim's river of humanity, so don't mind me if I drift on the lazy river a bit. Technology is critical, right? And all of these spaces, now everyone's on laptops, they all have their phones, and especially now when you think about places like Texas getting hit and people losing power, having public places that provide power is critical, not just in day-to-day, but even in emergency times too. So some of the things that we look at is just proximity, how much of it, but I think one point that Robin brought up that I think is critical is this idea of shade, and shade relates to technology, because you take your computer outdoors and all of a sudden the sun's shining on it, or the shadows are playing. And so that protection of glare is really critical and weighs into it. So all of those factors, making sure that there's good Wi-Fi, the power, the heating, the cooling, all of these things play into how effective and how usable the space is. And as Robin was pointing out about how hot it is, summers here, or how cold it is in Maine, how do you make those spaces? One of the reasons that I think there's a hesitancy to maybe overinvest in the outdoors is because a lot of those spaces are only usable for part of the year. That's how people view them. But if we can create spaces, and I think Dave and I were talking a little bit about this yesterday, but if you can create spaces that have all those indoor factors and those things that make us comfortable, and you bring those outdoors, yet still have those connections to nature that make us happier and healthier, give us the fresh air, which we know is better during times of pandemic or non-pandemic, that we're creating just a better work environment in general.
Sure. And I can tag onto that a little bit, Zan. So first of all, it is really cold and rainy here in Atlanta today. So that's probably why you're seeing us all inside where it's warm and dry. But you know, on the campus, it's almost easy for a campus to solve these problems that are sort of global problems, right? We can do ubiquitous Wi-Fi across campus, and our IT team is working on that now, right? So that if you're on campus, you have access to Wi-Fi, whether you're in a basement, you know, in a research building, or whether you're sitting out in a plaza on the quad. But then the power piece is a lot more difficult. And so in our current projects, as we're planning outdoor space, we're doing, you know, these little power poles, right, that you can put next to every seating area. And it's a fairly tremendous expense. These aren't inexpensive things, but again, to Zan's point, the idea is to make these spaces that you can actually go and be in, and not just be transient in, or not just, you know, sit in for 15 minutes while you eat your lunch, but actually spaces where you can sit and occupy and work. We've also explored different furniture options that have solar panels. So they kind of hit two of those buckets, that you're getting some shade by, you know, some sort of structure above that has solar on it, that also comes down and provides power for powering your devices. So I think the technology and the furniture and design world is constantly working to help us address some of these issues.
Jim and Dave, do you have any thoughts about all weather or technology infused spaces outside? Have you started thinking about that at all?
Yeah, go, Jim. Why don't you want to jump in first?
No,
Go ahead.
either way.
Yeah, I think that, you know, on the residential side, right, we're always thinking about, especially, you know, new development, right, infrastructure and connectivity, and when we start to think about, you know, bandwidth, right, I mentioned kind of the increase of residents, you know, working from home. You know, we think through contingency planning, right? Do we have one internet provider? Is it multiple internet providers, right, that bring service to a new development to try to spread some of that bandwidth? Those are all things that have to be considered. You know, and to the question that came in, you know, we've all, for the most part, become accustomed to being most productive at a desk, right? It's how our work environments have evolved, you know, most recently. That's changing, of course, but I think there's a lot of power too in the doses of nature that you can get. So if you're in an environment that doesn't have weather, you know, that is, you know, supportive of working outside for long periods of time, you still need that small dose, because the small dose of fresh air and nature goes a long way. Jim mentioned, you know, look out the window, you can walk down the Beltline. Well, if you can get up from your desk and get a 10-minute walk in and come back, you're going to be more productive, you're going to be happier, you're going to be healthier, and you're going to be able to keep your head down and get and continue to do your job. And so I think we also have to consider, you know, those spaces between buildings, right, that Robin mentioned. You know, yeah, they're thoroughfares, but are they also opportunities just to get fresh air? Of course. And so we're thinking through all of that, right? Where are those transitional zones? You know, what is the pedestrian experience in its entirety, so that we can bring people out of the units and onto a campus.
And I would also add, so I think the question is about technology and also just seasonality. I think from a seasonality perspective, you know, those of us on the panel all come from a city that one of the absolute greatest aspects of Atlanta is that we are really a 9 or 10 month outdoor city. And so, you know, yes, it gets extremely hot in the summer, and we are, as we speak, Robin mentioned, like in this very narrow window where it's a little cold, you know, for us to be outside, but when you compare it to what's going on in Chicago or another place like that, they think we're a little silly. But you know, I love the question about shade. I mean, absolutely, seminally important in an environment like Atlanta to include shade, but not just, I would say, not just shade structures and pavilions, but also, one thing that I've found over the years as I've developed projects, that if you look at landscaping as a line item on the 150, 200 line item hard cost budget, it is a tiny fraction of the cost of when you're talking about building a high-rise apartment building, hotel, office, etc. And for an even tinier fraction of a tiny fraction, you can actually get trees that are 6 or 8 inch caliper trees, as opposed to the little dinky trees that most developers plan in their projects. And so you sort of instantly not only have great space, but shade. And so that's one trick, I guess, that we use. And I'm sure I'm really preaching to the choir here, from the vast majority of you, but that's one great thing that I've found that we love to do, is to just instantly begin with more maturity on that front. Yeah.
Jim, real quickly, there's something interesting that you said, and it, this relationship to the Beltline, and I've said this a couple of times, but I find that Atlanta is in a renaissance period right now, and that there's a big trend for people moving to the city right now because there's more space, there's more green space, and there's people moving from New York, Robin, people moving from San Francisco, myself,
right,
and other cities that love the fact that Atlanta has so much green space. And then you take something like the Beltline that is fundamentally changing how people are living and working every single day, and then how it's changing development in the city, and it's all centered around not the core, it's centered around this green loop around the city.
right.
And so you can already, even before the pandemic, people were already shifting the mindset to focus on to be closer to those green spaces. And look at Central Park. I mean, look at property values next to Central Park, right?
Right.
Value's already there. To your point, it's that line item on the list, and are people willing to raise that, a notch or two to get more bang for their buck?
Right.
And so it's honestly, it's a really, really easy thing to do in the grand scheme of things. And you sort of instantly have more canopy than it would take 3, 4, 5 plus years to grow. As it relates to technology, it's interesting. At the risk of being a tiny bit contrarian, I don't mind telling everyone that I have a pretty high degree of ADHD personally, and which I think is sort of my superpower as it relates to being a developer, because you have to do so much all the time. But I find that I actually crave moments where I have less connectivity, and when I have to do inherently right brain things, that part of my job is sort of the constant shift between left and right brain all day, every day. But oftentimes what I end up doing is taking walks outside when I need to think, when I need to get away. And so, just like Robin, you mentioned low water park, I went to business school at Emory, and I exercised at low water when I needed to get away from everything. That was my absolute favorite place to go run and hang out. And so what's fun for us is, as we develop, like in the project that we're talking about here in Atlanta that we're working on now, we're building a 1 acre sort of central plaza space that's juxtaposed between the Beltline and the historic Fourth Ward Park, almost as a bit of a lily pad. And in the open space around the buildings, we're being very careful about public Wi-Fi and connectivity and all these things. But then they said, hey, do you want to introduce all this connectivity in the plaza? It's like, no. Let's put some swings and sculpture and power for food trucks and activation, but let's let that be a respite from our day, you know, and oftentimes that can be where the most productive work happens, is when 2 or 3 people come together and collaborate, and they're not being constantly buzzed and binged and vibrated. You know, they can really focus on the task at hand.
Yeah, I absolutely love this conversation. You know, yes, there are technology solutions, but, you know, as David reminded us, you know, outdoor space is not just, it relates to work not just as a space that you could work in, but also as a space that supports work in giving you that, you know, that sort of, you know, wellness space, that little extra space. And Jim, you know, you're absolutely reinforcing that. But also you've now brought up, you know, with your comment on trees, this notion that, you know, by focusing on outdoor space, you know, there's a potential for us to have a much larger impact beyond the footprint of the project that we happen to be concerned with or working on, right? So by bringing in trees, it's not just about providing shade there, but it's also about adding to the, you know, the carbon sequestration of the city, the lungs of the city. I mean, there's just so much. The act of bringing a tree in is such a small item in a line budget that has such tremendous, you know, potential impacts, right? And one of our questions from one of our audience members here, Rachel Zanetti, actually connects to that. She asks, are any of the presenters looking at how this new opportunity or focus of working outdoors could address other environmental or social issues? Example, climate change, homelessness, and equity. If so, what are some examples? I know, of course, you know, the Beltline has also been a driver around for a conversation around equity and you know, housing security in Atlanta. So I'd love to hear, you know, as we're thinking about outdoor work, as Jim was saying just a few minutes ago, can the utilization of the outdoor space have, you know, other advantages?
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in just because I love the question. So, you know, all the projects that we do, you know, we almost is sort of it's almost like an order qualifier. You know, we pursue LEED or NGBS, you know, all the sort of metrics that are required for, you know, Class A projects. But for me, it's always the fun challenge is like, how do we not just meet these standard metrics, but how do we create stories that are powerful that we can tell about the technology that we're introducing, right? So at a project I recently finished, you know, we planted a 1-acre green roof over a grocery store. And, you know, because there was an office building looking down on it, it was an inaccessible roof, but, you know, it was an important metric for LEED. You know, we harvested rainwater, et cetera. But then I said, how cool would it be if the sedums that we planted were actually pollinating, and we put apiaries on the roof? And then instead of, you know, the sort of boring tenant retention gifts that everybody gets when they go back to work, we gave them honey from the roof of their own building. And that instantly leads to this great story and this emotional reaction that people say, oh, this is my honey from my roof at my office building, and you get that instant ownership. Or this plaza space that I mentioned a second ago, where we actually collect all the rainwater runoff, clean it, and use it in the makeup air in the HVAC units on the roofs of the buildings. And so we're sort of neutralizing the use of potable water in that case. So it's these fun opportunities to layer on metrics with fun stories like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
else have any? Go ahead, Robin.
Well, I was just
Robin,
going
jump
to
in first,
say,
then we'll come to Dave.
okay, I was just going to say, to kind of build on what Jim was saying, is that so much of what we do is in service to sustainability and in service to the environment, and so much of it is hidden, right? So we go through the same thing, and so
Right.
we're looking at how, you know, from the science of the buildings and the spaces, how can we display that? So there are different like displays that can say, you know, how many gallons of water were used in this building today, and this idea that when you become aware of your consumption, that has an impact, right? And so we were looking into that sort of technology, but also sort of how we can, as an institution, almost open the doors to the community in a way. And so we look a lot at science on display, right? How can we help the work that's going on inside, you know, these closed up spaces be displayed outside? And sometimes it's literally just as simple as through glass windows that you can actually see into and see the work that's going on inside. And sometimes it's through community gardens that are sort of learning and teaching gardens throughout campus, green roofs, and education around where we have solar panels and where we have all of these different pieces. So a lot of it, I think, is just learning and experimenting with how to get the information out on what you are already doing.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to Robin and Jim's points here. I think that, you know, as developers, you always got to keep an eye on any opportunity there might be for energy audit or, you know, the low-hanging fruit to do your part, right? Because we, you know, frankly, don't have a great reputation at that. And so we have to go out of our way to make sure that we're participating in those conversations. And we've accomplished that by understanding the cost to upgrade and understanding the benefits, right? And we looked at third parties that can tell us that. And we have to check ourselves. You know, some of those benefits are, you know, from an energy consumption perspective that may have the you know, positive implications to climate change. You know, they're to benefit the resident, not necessarily the owner in a lot of cases. And so you are passing that savings along to your residents. And you have to be able to support that with hopefully resident retention, with you know, lower vacancy. And then on top of that, you have to look to the outdoors and bring the outside in, and whether that's through green roof opportunities and creating that transitional zone between inside and outside that Jim and Robin mentioned, or Zan and I are working on a project now here in West Midtown where we're contemplating you know, foliage on the building. You know, how do we actually create an insulation factor here, right? By supporting overgrowth and encouraging it. And so just some of the things that I think we all find in our industry to be a challenge and have to go out of our way to be a part of the solution of.
Yeah, I'll chime in, Avi, and I'll try to hit both points because I think they're both really, really important to me. One is I'll start with the sustainability question because I think that's critical, and Perkins and Will is an extremely sustainable firm focused on resilience and sustainability with each project. We, for our own building, which at one point was the highest rated LEED building in the world, we consider it a laboratory, right? And so it's our own personal laboratory, and we measure the performance of what we've implemented. And so there are things like permeable paving that we've put out there, and you know, the first year we took a big cauldron of water and we dumped it down, and it all went down. And a few years ago, I went out there with a glass of water and I poured it, and it just rolled off the top because we hadn't vacuumed it and we hadn't maintained it. And so understanding those things are really, really important to us. And so by all means, we look at it, one, on kind of how are our projects performing, not just when we finish them, but 5 years, 10 years after. And then right now, our group is actually working on our own sustainability metrics of how to gauge our own project, because LEED and sites and well, there's 400 certifications right now, and we don't want something that's checking the box that just tries to cover everything. We want something that really means something, and I think that's what the other three panelists are saying is what are we actually achieving on our projects, and how is it performing? And then I want to switch to the equity question, because boy, that's a loaded topic. And the Beltline in particular has really created a dialogue about it. And I think it's a very positive dialogue. I think it's one that has to happen. And I wish this would happen more often. One thing that our firm does do is we give back to the community our time, and the panelists will have to close their ears. But some of my favorite projects are actually those projects where we are giving back to the community, and we are donating our time and really helping lift individual groups, individual communities, and at the end of the day, the city, right? Because the city is only as strong as the weakest link, right? And so if we can continue to give to these communities and continue to lift them up, Atlanta will continue to thrive, and the other communities that we work in as well.
Right, absolutely. Thanks so much for ending on that note, Sam, because I mean, equity is really important, and in the direct ways that you're talking about, you know, directly working with populations that be underserved or disadvantaged in some way, that's really important, and that's absolutely vital. I just love to step on my soapbox for just a second and say that, you know, sustainability is also an essential aspect of equity. You know, every kilogram of carbon emissions that you save or avoid, every kilogram of carbon that you sequester, every drop of water that you save, all of those are things that benefit society and humanity as a whole. It's really some of the most equitable work that you can do. You know, controlling the climate within your building benefits the people who are in the building, but saving energy is you're saving energy for the planet, you know, for humanity as a whole. And so there is a fundamental notion of equity built into sustainable practice as well. And of course, Perkins & Will has been an absolute leader in that. And thanks, Anne, for all the work that you do on that front as well. One of our attendees, quick comment here, can we shift as an industry from calling these spaces amenities to essential program, right? So I think that's the fundamental shift we're talking about today, is taking outdoor space and thinking of it as part of the essential program of a building. I'm gonna leave that there as a comment, you know, because that's fundamental to all of the things we've been talking about. Anya Kolek asks, how is Generation Z and Millennial demographics driving the design of outdoor spaces? I'll generalize that a little bit more and say, are there generational preferences at play here?
I would say that really from an office perspective and also from, you know, there really been such a blend between product types, you know, from a vertical construction design perspective. David referred to it, you know, with not just from the work from home trends, but I tell people a lot that I feel like I'm actually in the hospitality business more than anything else, because at the end of the day, back to that original question that I love to ask, you know, imagine if you really loved where you went to work, you know, really the major power shift in site selection activities has gone from the C-suite of many companies into the HR department. And what that means is, you know, the people that are really focused on, you know, picking the best spot for their office is really thinking about recruiting and retention. And as Millennial and Gen Z generations really have taken over the bulk of the workforce, really their loyalty to a company is largely dependent on their satisfaction and their enjoyment of the space that they're in. And so, you know, we talk a lot about how, you know, the architecture, the space around them is really accretive, can ultimately be accretive to their culture, and how the design of their interior space as it spills out can all sort of, again, blend seamlessly together. And so I think it's the shift and the sort of tectonic shift that's going on generationally, I think is really just, again, undergirding a fundamental principle that, you know, whether you're 22 or 62, enjoying where you work and live and the environment around you is really fundamental to a good life and living in community, you know.
I wonder if Robin in particular, if you have a viewpoint on the generational stuff, because of course on campus you see that. We'll take your response, Robin, and then I think we'll move on to the next question.
I would not assume to speak for millennials, but I will say that we serve all generations, right? And I honestly think the wellness linked to the outdoors is universal. And we all feel it, and we all especially feel it when it's not there, right? When you are in when you are in an environment where you cannot, you can't orient yourself to anything that's around you. And I feel like that's an environment you often find yourself in when you're visiting like a major healthcare center or something, where it's all just organic growth and there's not a lot of moments of, relief. And so providing those moments to kind of ground yourself in where you are, in your relationship to the outdoors, and then that relationship of, not relationship, but kind of that fundamental importance to wellness, I really do think is universal for all of us.
Just real quickly, I think there's also a connection to the earlier question with technology, right? That my mom's not so great with technology, so she's not driving the need there. It's really the future generations that we're designing for, and I think Jim hit it right on the head with the retention and recruiting. We have a project we're working on right now. It's actually one of our social purpose projects, and they were asking for space for TikTok videos, right? And it's like, we need a space because this is what the kids do after school, and we need you to design that. And so it is changing what we do. And the other piece that we sell a lot, are especially for development projects, are Instagrammable spaces, right? That those are now draws to major developments, right? And so how do you create something that is so amazing that everybody wants to stand out there and take their picture, and then it's free advertising to some degree, right? So those moments are really valuable. So Gen Z and the future generations are driving very much how we're approaching our design with our clients.
So we're going to start taking a few questions here a little more rapidly, because we have a lot of questions on the docket, and we have a little bit of time together still. A question for Robin. Jeff Morrissey asks, says, we're attempting to proactively work on socially distanced exterior campus space use. It's difficult. Our students tend to not believe that CDC guidelines actually apply outside. Pre-pandemic, they had deployed Senate-type park chairs in a major quad. And yes, flexible is great, but we wanted the chairs to move, but controlling this is challenging. Are you dealing with this sort of thing at all at Emory? I'm writing from Washington University in St. Louis. And we have somebody else from St. Louis who said, well, CDC guidelines are being scoffed at indoors as well. So, just this thing of, we think of the outdoors as this like very open, flexible space, like that's part of the nature of the outdoors, yet you do have to control people to some extent. So can you talk about that a little bit, Colin?
Right, and that was a huge part of our planning, right? What role does policing these policies have, right? And so in the end, we have rules and policies to be on campus, and you have to go online and sign a form saying you agree to all of these policies, that you'll keep your distance, you'll always wear your mask, whether you're inside or outside. If you're on campus, you wear a mask, and everyone has to sign it, students, faculty, staff. But that's the form on a computer, right? That's not necessarily what the reality is. I do have to say that that I think because we are a fairly large city, we are literally right next door to the CDC, and we are a major healthcare and public health university. I think there probably is sort of a culture of respecting the science, but we do have a whole team who comes around at the end of every single day and takes all of those chairs we have around campus and resets them back so that there's only one chair at a table and all of the chairs are separated. So, you know, there's only so much you can do. And you just try to model good behavior when you can, and encourage all of those you encounter to model that good behavior as well.
Dave, I have a question that I think might be right up your alley. Amelia Holshut says, if work is starting to shift outdoors in more mixed-use developments, how do you delineate between more office work type space and more residential amenities, or do you delineate them at all? I think you were talking about something similar in one of your comments. If you want to just build on that a little bit.
Yeah, it was really just the priority, right? And how we think about the amenity spaces that we have been developing pre-COVID, and then what they look like now. And to me, there's a distinction, right? Whether it's and it's not a distinction that's achieved by just placing tables and chairs, right? To Robin's point, to link these two questions, right? They get moved around. It's about creating an environment that is inviting enough and appreciated enough by the user that they want to stay in it, right? And hopefully we can create that environment that is a safe space. But we can't control it all. And so I do believe, just to directly answer the question, it's about changing that priority, whether it be for an office user in a mixed use development or a resident that has the opportunity to work in their unit, on their balcony, or in a public-private space. They have to feel comfortable and as safe as we can make them. That's what leads to Jim's point, to retaining your workforce and your residents. So we are in many ways, along with everybody else, reacting right now. Have no choice.
Right. We have a lot of questions, a lot of requests here for the book or the presentation that you shared, San. For everyone who's asked that, please go into the chat window. We do have a link to it in there. So it is available. Perkins & Will has been very generous in terms of sharing their research and sharing their ideas. So please take a look. Please feel free, take a look at it. So that's there for you to use. So we have a question here that relates not just to the core city, but also to areas around cities. And I'd love to talk about that. We had a great discussion, Jen Peterson and Jennifer White, who asked that question. We had a great discussion a couple of weeks ago about re-densification of the suburbs and how this pandemic might prove to be a great impetus for that as well. And we talked a lot about outdoor space in that discussion. So if you have the time, please go back and listen to that too. But the question here is, we'd love to hear from the real estate owner managers on the panel to talk about plans to decentralize their campus or development projects, or multiply outdoor sites of productive exchange to areas beyond city limits where this isn't happening so well. Jim, I wonder if this is a thought that's even crossed your mind. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, a distributed workplace or a work ecosystem. I'm sure you've come across those concepts. Is that something you're considering, even in general terms, even if it's not part of current project?
Yeah, we think about it all the time, and to the degree that it has, a fundamental impact on the way people work, I think it's our responsibility to consider it, right? From the redistribution of the workforce, I think, studies that we've read and anecdotes from the tenants that we're working with now indicate that, post-vaccination, whenever things, reach a new normal, however we choose to define that, indicate that somewhere between, 15 and 35 to 40% of people, could on a more regular basis work remotely, which I think bodes well for, David and multifamily developers. I think though, at the end of the day, really the most basic fundamental that we have learned in this pandemic is that whether we are dispensationally introverted or extroverted, we are all inherently social creatures, and we need to be around each other, and not just our immediate family, but I think just literally the feeling that we all get by being, near each other is fundamental to who we are as human beings. And why I bring that up is because, really what interests me as a developer is creating places, again, that it sounds so simple, but creating places that people enjoy, and not just preserving the architecture for what's in the sky, but really, again, democratizing what you experience at the human scale, which I think ultimately is about equity, that great architecture, great things for people to touch and see and enjoy, and Instagram and TikTok and whatever hasn't been invented yet. I mean, all of that happening on the human level is what I really love about the Beltline, is because the Beltline is the place in Atlanta where, if you want to see people who are Black, brown, white, hearing 10 different languages, you just need to go out on a random weekday afternoon and you see it all. And then to be able to bring them through, enjoy public spaces, water features, green spaces that you've created. And then, you don't know if they're your tenants or the public, and they're all coming together in interesting ways. That to me is what is just the most fulfilling, compelling thesis of what we do. And so whether that's happening in densification, that's happening in suburbs or in the urban core, really at the end of the day, as developers, what we are seeking are places that people want to be, if that makes sense.
Right. Absolutely. And absolutely. We have a couple of really tactical questions here. Robin, you set off a storm with your mention of the tents. So, a lot of people want to know about the tents. And Zan, I'd love to hear a little bit about the work pavilions, because I think a lot of folks are asking about those structural solutions as well. So I'm sorry, I'm not naming everyone because there's a lot of those questions, but Robin, the question is, how did you furnish those tents? And more generally, because you said the tents were a device for, working outside in like 90-degree weather, how do you also maintain social distancing in those tents? So let's take that first, and then we'll move to Zan.
So we are renting the tents, to be totally honest with you. We had to get them there and out in a really short amount of time, and renting them from, party rental places. So they're the big tents like you often see at weddings. They're white, they look fine. So we furnished them with only enough furniture, that you have, your 6-foot circle around you inside. They all get mushed together during the day. And again, we have our teams who come out and spread them out at night. And then we also, it's not just the tent, but it's everything to support the actions that go on in the tent. So each tent has its own Wi-Fi so that you can have all your devices in the tent. We provided power where we could. Honestly, these weren't spaces that were made to have tents, so power has been a struggle. We also have sanitation stations in every tent, so you can sanitize your hands and everything. I can say one challenge with the tents that we didn't anticipate was what to do during inclement weather. So everyone has storms, right? So we had in the fall a major storm come through, and everyone was working 24 hours a day for a couple of days to figure out how to batten down the hatches on our tents and make sure people weren't trying to shelter in them during the storm. So we're learning more about our tents every day. But we would have never considered tents before this. I mean, Emory is a place with these very rigid design standards. But now we're learning to love our tents, and we're starting to talk about purchasing some tents to serve needs, into the future that we can kind of easily take down ourselves and put back up when we need them.
Zan, really quick, just a couple of minutes, comment on sort of the work pavilions. So like, semi-permanent or deployable structures or permanent structures that can be outdoors but are kind of open. We have a couple of questions there. Heather Barker says, do you have experience with deployable product-based work pavilions? We had another one, and then we have some folks providing product recommendations as well, including Upfit from Landscape Farms. But Zan, go ahead. Can you tell us about how you were thinking about those work pavilions in your working landscape stuff?
Yeah, and I actually am going to start with the tents, because I think the tents is important. And I was reading this article today that was talking about tents in Central Park and how they were these temporary hospitals, as COVID and the cases increases. And so the tents are these temporary structures. And I think, maybe I can convince Robin and her team that she needs more permanent structures moving forward. The structures and landscape forums has a great one, and there's many of them out there that have been developed. And I think when we were developing them, we were thinking about a couple different things. And one is how do you factor in everything that needs to go into them, and still kind of make them simple and cost effective and light. And so weather was a really big one, right? And like, how do you have partitions that can enclose or open up depending whether it's a pandemic or non-pandemic, whether it's a snowstorm, whether it's raining, those factors really come into play. How is it used? Is there flexible furniture that can be moved out so it can be used as kind of a platform, a stage for an event? What kind of seating is there? You'll see that there's kind of step terracing as part of it that can be used as kind of a place for a classroom to gather and someone to give a small lecture to a small class to, or you have the high top table in there that can be used as a workspace for an individual or as a collaboration space for a larger group. So there's a lot of thought that goes into those spaces, and it's hard to solve all of those needs on, while you're working on real projects, but we did try to accommodate as much as possible. And we do have clients who are asking for these solutions. And so we're looking forward to working with them and really honing these elements and then getting them implemented in real time.
Absolutely. So folks, we're, thank you so much for all the comments you made. I have one last question for all of you, but before we go to that question, I just want to say, that a huge thank you to our audience for all the amazing ideas they've brought up in the Q&A. If any of you haven't looked in the Q&A tab recently, please go in and look there. There's thoughts about water features. I think a question just came in about what can we learn from refugee camps, if anything. There's certainly questions about housing homeless people. Susan Wilhoft in particular, thank you for all the ideas you put in there. I did see the one about giving big box workers space to recuperate and relax outside rather than giving them empty paved over concrete parking lots. So much amazing stuff. There's no way we could get to all of it in the time we have. This is certainly an amazing and rich topic. So thank you all so much for your engagement and your participation. I'm sorry we can't answer every single question, but I think we've certainly laid out all the big principles here. One last thing I'd love to hear comments on from all our wonderful panelists today. I think, of course, we can't say build it and they will come. Even though that's been proven in some cases. So I'd just love to hear, what we can do to embrace or encourage, responsible, safe use of outdoor space, whether it is for work itself or as a support to work, as David suggested, in terms of respite and wellness, or as Jim suggested, even the view or the connection to work. So let's just talk about how we can encourage, greater use of the outdoors, and greater sort of connection to the outdoors. I'll take those as closing comments before we close out today's program. Go ahead, San.
I'm going to keep mine really short, and I'm going to use a comment that was already said, and that is, if we can consider this as essential program moving forward, that we will position ourselves for the future. And I think that's key, no matter what discipline, what field, what industry we're in, that if we can all really consider this as mandatory, and we change our way of thinking, that we will be in a much better place in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and to add to that, and I'll also be brief here. I agree with Robin. Nature and the outdoors and wellness is universal. We talked about it as like when we were comparing, generation to generation. But nature is forgiving, and so Avi, not to oversimplify it, but build it and they will come is actually a good, I think, motivator for all of us. I think it has to be built right, and it has to be programmed appropriately. But we have people like Jim who want to use that space to disconnect, and we have others who need to remain connected. And so if we can build in that flexibility into these projects, I think we'll all be much better off.
So I'll go next. I will say it can't be accidental, right? It has to be fundamental from the very, very zygote of that idea, right? It's not something that you can come back and try to squeeze in later and have it be successful. And I think as owners or as owners representatives, we have the power to make sure that it is fundamental to the process.
And I would just build on Robin. It's such a good point. The beauty of working in an environment like Emory is that anything that you're touching is really you're thinking about 100-year lifespan. And then from I would say about the sort of commercial development perspective is that commercial developers as a group, as a body are the single greatest copycats of any sector of humanity, and constantly looking around for new trends and new ideas. And if we do what Zan suggested, and this becomes a fundamental core thesis, when we look around and we see, oh my gosh, look at all these people and they love this place, then all of a sudden it gets into the psyche of how we execute projects, and it no longer just becomes the seventh thing on that long list of amenities, but it becomes the fundamental core thesis of projects that we do.
Whoever in the audience put in that comment about taking it from amenity to essential program, I think you've kind of won the day in the audience comments. It's the fundamental idea that we're talking about today. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zan, Jim, Robin, and David, for all your comments and your great insights today. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you to all our attendees who've stuck with us and who've been so engaged today. Again, just going back and reading through the Q&A, talking about childcare outdoor spaces, or it's just the ideas in here are incredible. So a huge, huge thank you to our audience today. You guys are absolutely awesome. And of course, a big thank you to our sponsors, Growy, Knoll Textiles, Landscape Farms, Material Bank, Mohawk, Tucci, and Woodard Craftmade for making today's discussion possible. A huge thank you to Perkins & Will for hosting us today and for bringing this group together. We really, really appreciate it. As Tina said at the start of this, if you want to dive back into this conversation and listen to some of the comments here, today's discussion is recorded and will be available for viewing on Metropolis's homepage next Thursday. We're also going to be publishing a report on this conversation on metropolismag.com in the next few weeks, as well as in a future print issue of Metropolis. So look out for that. Our next discussion is going to be in March, and we're going to be talking business. We're talking about revolutionizing the specification process, one of the most difficult parts of the design process right now in the pandemic, as we're all, in distributed work mode. We're talking about new technology platforms and technology integration around sustainability, around simpler sampling and specifying, but also about specification practices and how those are set to change. So please do join us for that discussion. That will be on March 18th, in about a month. Registration details will be on metropolismag.com and on our social channels. Again, thank you all so much for joining us today. It's been absolutely wonderful and a fantastic discussion. I hope everyone, wherever you are, you're staying safe, depending on the weather conditions out there. And as soon as the weather permits, I hope you will go outside and take advantage of the outdoors. Thank you again, and have a great evening.